Kurt and Debbie Swindoll were supposed to be up here with us this morning. We got a message. Kurt was working out and started to experience some confusion. That is not a good thing. So we spent the day at the hospital, and I can report that up to this point, all tests are negative, and it's looking very promising. And they are even using a diagnosis that he's not going to like. I'll tell you about it. He's not going to like this. It's called transient global amnesia. And it's no reason whatsoever that it happens, and it comes and it goes. But he had this experience, and so he is still in the hospital. In fact, if they have not released him right now, I'm going to go on record as saying he is crawling out his window as we speak. Because I learned a lot about Kurt yesterday. So, hey, thanks for being here. Let me tell you where we have been a little bit. And then my lovely wife, Sue, is up here. We're going to try to continue with what we had actually planned for today. And then let me invite you next week. Will be a lot of fun. We're going to summarize it and Lord willing, pray for everything. Kurt and Debbie will be back up here with us next week, and we're gonna have a conversation that's culminating next week about this whole spiritual life, walking with God. What does that look like, and how do we even put it into play? So here's where we have been. We started a couple weeks ago, and I said to you that at Journey, one of the things that we believe is the most important thing. In fact, when you come here as a guest, we don't want you to hear, hey, here's how to get a t-shirt, here's how to become a member. We want you to understand one very important thing at Journey, and it's this, that we believe the most important thing you can ever do with your life is to walk a life, discover a life with God. Your purpose is to walk with God. We think every person was created to that end. That's why we're having this conversation. We have, over the centuries, we've created our own language, and you'll hear things like this. If you've never been around a church, you've been around a church a little, maybe you're just still questioning God. You've heard things like people talk about getting saved, right? You've heard that terminology. You've heard things about, we're converting people. You've heard those kinds of phrases. They make my skin crawl sometimes. We use phrases like follow Jesus. I like that one. I think there's nothing wrong with that phrase. We talk about a personal relationship with God. And then there's one that really, when you get outside the United States, if you've never been outside, this one will drive the rest of the world crazy. We've used this phrase, that we accept Jesus into our heart. Those are all phrases. And listen, none of them are necessarily evil in and of themselves. But the question is, do you really understand what they mean? There's a clarity that's missing in so much of our language that's wrapped around Christianity these days. You get outside the U.S., and if you talk to somebody from another country, another Christian, and they hear that phrase, accepting Jesus into your heart, they believe that's a distinctly Western phrase. And they also believe that it's a soft phrase, because when they hear you say that, they think, oh, you're just a person who heard about Jesus. He sounded like a really good idea to you. So you mentally said yes to him, but you've not done anything with your life. That's what they believe. So these phrases, I'm not saying that's what you did. Okay, please don't hear me say that. Some of these phrases have been used for years and years and years, and they're not evil. But what kind of clarity do they bring? So the real issue we're tackling is, where do you get your assurance from? If your purpose is to walk with God, what does that look like, and where do you get your assurance from? The first week I took you to Genesis. I said that's where it all begins, right? And we said when God put Adam and Eve in the garden, something happened. He invited them into a relationship with himself. He invited them to walk with him. Right? He was going to walk with them. They were going to walk with him. They were going to do this thing together. And this serpent shows up on the scene. And of course, to most of you, your greatest fear in life is that a snake is not just going to be with you, but the snake is going to talk to you. That would be scary. This snake speaks. And later on in the scriptures, we discover who the snake is. We discover this is Satan talking through this snake. But the snake shows up, and he says to both of them, he says, to the woman, he says, but the man was there. He says, you will not surely die. God said, if you eat of this tree, you're going to die. He goes, no. That's not what's going to happen. The serpent says, you're not going to die. For God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes are going to be opened and you will be, watch this, like God, knowing good and evil. And the temptation in that moment, and to this day for all of us, is this. Then instead of walking with God, we actually want to be like God. And the thing is, none of us are going to say that. I mean, you're not going to go to lunch today or sit around at the Super Bowl party and say, yeah, I'm really struggling with how I'm trying to be like God today. Nobody. First of all, they're going to think you're crazy. I got a voicemail a couple of weeks ago. See, now my wife's up here so I can go off on tangents. I got a voicemail. No lie to you. Somebody said, church voicemail, I'm a God. Can we talk? No, I didn't call him back. But you're not going to say that this afternoon. You're not going to go tell somebody, I'm really struggling to be like God. I know you're not going to do that. But the reality is that's our temptation. That instead of walking with God, so much of how we come into this world and what the world is telling us is to be in charge of our own destiny, to be in control of our own fate, to be like God. So the question is, are you aware of that? And so many times we are not aware of this in our lives. But that lie the serpent told us is still alive. Are you trying to live life on your own terms? And so we've talked this through a little bit. We've been working it through, and we realize God's got a solution to that problem. That the original rebellion of trying to be like God, God now has a solution to that. The whole Bible is this story of him reaching out, revealing himself to us, talking to us about the solution, and the solution is, of course, Jesus Christ. But in that solution, listen, most of us, if we're honest, anybody else have a bad week lately? I mean, at my house, we're asking if 2020 can start over again. The ER visit yesterday was the 4th ER visit for a leadership family at Journey since December 25th. Now, you can talk about coincidence all you want, but man, my leaders are starting to look for other churches, right? I mean, some of you are getting a little freaked out. Walking with God requires something. But so many times our lives, when the bad stuff comes up, what happens? We get really dissatisfied with life. We start to get a little upset. Like, why am I even walking with God if all this bad stuff's coming in? So a couple weeks ago, we came up with this statement, this proclamation, that really dissatisfaction, what God does is it's an invitation to understand my brokenness more. To understand my brokenness in the heart of Jesus. In other words, the world's just a mess. And becoming a Christian does not make the world all right all of a sudden. In fact, it doesn't even make your life perfect. But so many times that's what we thought we were signing off on. So we've been pushing into this, that invitation, because what we discovered last week, we talked a lot about, and my wife is going to talk more in a second. She's not just going to sit up here and look pretty. But what we've discovered is the things that we're dissatisfied with so much in our lives are the areas where, be honest, where we can find the things we treasure most in life. The things we really treasure in life tip our hand as to what we really are trying to get out of life. Right? We look to God to be our, this guy who will deliver us our treasures so many times. And we made this statement last week that God is not how we acquire treasures. So many of us were thinking, well, I came to God because I had this thing I wanted, and I had this fear of losing it. And so my fear of losing that treasure drives me to go to God. But so many times we're asking God, just give me the treasure. But that's not what he's doing. In fact, he's not trying to just give us the treasure. He is the treasure. And so the question is now, how do we live into it? Now, last week we started talking about 4 areas that we can approach God. If you take these treasures, these things about how most of us are wired, in the way you approach God, so many times our fears are going to drive how we approach God, right? Because we're afraid of losing something. We're afraid of missing out on something. So the fears drive us to approach God a certain way. And when we do, we're still trying to approach God on our terms. We're trying to get from God something. And so we kind of started to outline these 4 areas. We're going to go back to those. But before we do that, I want to give you 2 statements real quick, and then I want to ask you to jump in on a piece of this. The first is I'm going to start with a proverb. Proverbs are a collection of sayings in the Old Testament. They are called generalized truths. In other words, a proverb is a generalized statement that holds true most of the time. Okay? It's not trying to outline some rule that if you do this, then God's going to do this. Okay? Because that's not how the world works. So Proverbs 1, verse 7 makes this statement: the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. So a very generalized statement. A person who can be foolish usually is a person that we find is somebody who doesn't want to listen to good advice. They don't want to listen to wisdom. They kind of run off and do their own thing, right? Everybody in here has been a fool at least at one time in your life. I guarantee it. If you were a teenager, you were probably a fool for a little stretch of a time. Because, right, when we were teenagers, we're pushing back and we're trying to figure life out. So sometimes we don't like to listen to mom and dad and their wisdom. We just think they're kind of crazy, right? We all have done that. So he says that's a general truth. The fools despise wisdom and instruction, but he starts with the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Now there's something I want to point out in here real quick, because we talked about this verse a lot and we've used it, and we all argue about fear, right? Anybody, well, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand, but so many times we think about fear of God. It's a little conflicting for us, right? Like how can he be a God of love if I'm supposed to be afraid of him? But the rabbis would have 2 different ways that they would use this word fear so many times. One was reverence. You know what I mean? It's the kind of respect that you have, even for authority, that you recognize the power they might have over your life. The second version of fear that they would use in this description would be a fear of retribution. That this awe, this reverence that you could have for an authority figure, that at some point in time you might go crossways with that authority figure and they could bring some kind of retribution, some kind of correction into your life. It sounds a lot like a parent, right? As a child, you probably, I hope you had a healthy respect for your family. I know some of us didn't get good, healthy families at times, and so maybe you didn't, but for most of us, I hope you had a healthy fear. Mom and Dad, when they laid down the law, you knew they were going to bring some punishment if you broke their rules, right? And it wasn't that you were scared to death of them, but you had a healthy fear. That's what's going on in this verse. So that's the first statement. Now bring up the second statement, because here's what Aristotle said. He made this statement: knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. It sounds a little contradictory. We've been talking about this all week. It sounds a little contradictory. In fact, put both of those statements on the screen at one time so you can see them. My question to you is, have you ever thought about this? Is it contradictory? Because Aristotle seems to say that there's something that you have to know about you before you can really grow in some kind of wisdom. And the question is that contradictory? And I don't know, we've been talking about this. What did you say this week as we were talking about this?
Knowing ourselves is what leads to the fear of God. When we ask God to examine our hearts and show us where's that darkness in my heart, and he reveals that to us, then we can go to him and ask him to help us with those areas. And that's how we begin to fear God, by knowing who we are and knowing who he is, and understanding who he is, that he is a mighty God, but he's a loving God. He's gracious. He's a redeemer. He wants to restore us. But it's through that knowing more and understanding more about our own hearts that we understand really more of who God is. And
use the word, we had one word we kept coming up with that I think is very a great descriptor of this process. What's the word we came up with? When you begin to know yourself, what do you discover about yourself in relationship to God?
Yeah, we discover that we really want to be autonomous from God. We, as humans, our sinful nature, we think, oh, we got this. I don't need help. And we think we can just figure it all out on our own, and we become autonomous from God.
Yeah, and if you begin to pay attention to this, so many times it feels like as Christians or people who are trying to follow Jesus, or maybe you've heard other people talk about it. Have you ever heard that Christians don't like counseling? That because sometimes this idea of self-discovery, I used to hear it all the time. Well, all you need is Jesus, right? You just need to know Jesus. Which, how do you argue with that, right? How do you argue? Somebody says, well, God said, well, okay, I'm out. I mean, you know, if somebody right, they say to you, well, God told me to do this, or God led me this direction. They're saying, you can't say anything to make me think this any other way, because I'm playing the trump card. I'm not going to go argue with God on their behalf, right? But so sometimes I think as Christians, we tend to think that self-discovery and some counseling or things like that they don't fit into the Christian life. Well, the truth is that anytime you're learning about yourself, some things about yourself, that you're then able to learn more about God in that moment, if you're willing to accept it. Autonomy is one of the things we all should be aware of. Even if you're saying, well, I'm just still not sure what I think about Jesus. That's great. Will you be honest with yourself, though, that the bulk of your life is spent trying to be your own person, to live autonomously, to make life work? And when you do that, it's going to tell you something about who God is or who he can be in your life as well. Every one of us is born with a natural bend towards autonomy. And I say this all the time, and I love it because audiences are, people, look, all you have to do is have one child. And if you've never had kids, it's okay. All you have to do is know a child. Seriously. Maybe that's you in life. You're like, nah, I know too many kids. They can have them, right? You have to know somebody's child to know children are bent towards autonomy. And so many times it's what gets all of us in trouble. So in this process that we've started a couple weeks ago, we talked about walking with God, right? The only way we can get there is to begin with a recognition that we've got to begin to surrender this autonomy. Because walking with God cannot happen if you want to be autonomous from God. Now, David said we don't have flyers this morning. It's for very good reason. When we had the whole panel going to be here, we still want you to do this. I wanted you to sit. I wanted you to sit and kind of listen this morning. And when you leave, we're going to hand you a flyer that has a whole bunch of stuff in it, including a summary page of all of these approaches to God. We're going to give you everything. And you can take it and sit with it, read through it. But instead of a propositional statement, instead of me telling you, hey, today when you leave here, I want you to do these 3 things or what, we're going to give you some questions to ask this week. Because my ultimate goal, church, is we develop a first response to God this way. That we consider our own autonomy first. Begin to ask ourselves, let the Holy Spirit search our hearts and reveal to us our autonomy. And in that, we begin to discover the places we've got to surrender to be able to walk with him. Because he's not going to walk, he's not going to do this thing if you're just not saying, I don't want to go there with you. I just want to be with me. You have to be willing to be willing. I didn't say you had to get it right. You just got to be willing to be willing, right? And part of that is knowing our own autonomy. So let's go back to the 4 descriptions. We talked about last week, a life over God position. And there you've got it on the screen. This is a great little descriptor. We used these 4 characters last week. We were going to use personal stories this week, but they're a little abbreviated because I'm not going to tell Kurt's story for him. But we talked about Doug, Larry, Cassie, and Stacy last week. We talked about life over God. Life over God is that position where your hope is based only in the principles of this world. That you tend to think that life has certain principles that make life work. And so what I have to do is I have to know the principles. And if I learn the principles, then what will happen? Then I just do the principles. And ultimately, here's what happens. Your hope is in the principles and you don't need God. Like he just kind of started everything, and we recognize him. We get he's a great guy, but we can just step back and let God's over there. But if I just do the principles, then everything will work. Listen, if you were born in Texas, raise your hand. Yeah, we got a strike against us already. Because more than any other state in the union right now, what is Texas known for? Our attitude, our spirit, that we are going to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, which means what? There's a way to make things work. I just have to figure it out. There's a principle out there somewhere. There's a way to get through something, right? There's a way to make life work. I just got to figure it out. And you know what? In Texas, by golly, we're proud of ourselves, and we're going to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, and we're going to push through, and we're going to make life work. So for those of us born here, I can tell you right now, this is one we're going to struggle with probably. This is not my key one, but it can be. I lean on this sometimes. You may see yourself in all four of these descriptions, but the question is that you? Do you think about God? Is he giving you the smarts to just get it done? Like just make it happen? And if that's how you think about him, is there a chance that you don't really need to think about him then? That you can just get it done on your own? Is that the kind of life that you find yourself leaning towards? A life over God, where the principles drive my life, and I don't need him. And if you don't live this way, you've got somebody in your world that probably does live this way, and you know this because what? Because they're always telling you, if you just do this, this would work out for you. If you just live life this way, if you just make this decision, everything would be good. But for many of us, that's how we relate to God. We think of him as a God who's he set the principles up, and all I have to do now is I just have to see them through. And here's the problem. My greatest fear in all this is what? It's going to be life doesn't work. Like it doesn't work out. That's my greatest fear. And it's going to bind me up, and it's going to keep me. What's it going to do? For those of us who live this way most of the time, it's going to cause us to keep drilling down into the principles. Like I just got to find the next principle. I just got to get it done. I got to get it done. I got to get it done. And we will drive ourselves crazy trying to live this autonomous life of just getting it done, right? That's life over God. The life under God is an interesting one. This is one that revolved, we describe this person as somebody who lives with all the moral code and the rules. This is the person who believes that the way you approach God is to control all of the things he says to do. And so I gotta keep attending church as much as I want to. Keep getting it right. And if I do all of this, then God will bless me. God will make life work out for me. Yesterday morning, just brutally honest, I get this call or this text that Kurt is sick. And Kurt and Debbie, we've known them for almost a year, and they've become good friends pretty quickly. And we have been using some of their curriculum from Grafted Life Ministries. But more than anything, like I believe in their ministry. I believe in the direction. I think what they're bringing to light is this life with God conversation is important for the church at large today. I believe this is something we have been missing. I do. And I'm hearing other pastors talk about it. And that we don't all have the same words, but the conversation is coming up. So I've been energized by this conversation with you. And I get this text. And of course, the immediate text is that Kurt is confused. And his memory is slipping and something's going wrong. And if you know anything about life and illnesses, my mind immediately runs to the darkest place it can go. And I'm thinking, he's having a stroke. And I'm thinking to myself, we're driving to the hospital. I'm thinking, we're sitting there together, but I'm just internally, I'm doing this thing with God, what are you doing? What are you doing with this new friend of mine? This conversation is so important. Like, I believe in this. I think what you're working through, some of this ministry is great. I think people need to hear this. What are you doing? And then here's where I go. What have we done wrong? Did we mess up somewhere? And see, that's that life under God thing. Something's going wrong. Something's going bad. I must have messed up. And that's a heavy load. But that's where that life under God, for me, it hit me. I'm driving, I'm going, what am I doing? All of a sudden, I could see it. I was slipping into this pattern again all of a sudden. It's like life under God. It's exhausting. Because when anything comes up in your life that is dissatisfying, that's a problem. Anybody had a bad thing happen this week? If you live under God like this, you know what you have to do? Where did I mess up? You got to live with this weight. And you know what it is? It's a transactional God that you're turning him into. I'll do this, God, and you just give me this. And that is a weight none of us want to carry. That's not true Christianity. You say, well, that's where I've kind of lived. It's okay, right? We're learning. You have to learn these things. But that is a heavy weight none of us wants to carry. Well, if I obey, God will do everything I want. Because ultimately, what you're still saying is, my autonomy wants what it wants, and so I'm going to obey just so I can get what I want from God. Life under God. That's heavy. Life from God. Let's get you back into this conversation a little bit. Life from God. This is one that you've kind of related to a little bit over the years. And up there, we called him Larry's story last week. If you didn't hear it, you can go back and listen to it. But it says that Larry, basically, if you're living the life from God, your hope is in your personal desires. In other words, everything about your autonomy drives you towards your own desires, your own drives, and to be comfortable. That was the word we kept saying this week. Talk to us about that a little bit.
Yeah, so, I mean, while I can relate to all four of these, I think this is the one that I probably live in more so. The story that really came to mind first when I was thinking about this area was, 28 years ago now, when Cecil and I started talking about...
When we were 12?
Yeah. We were living in San Antonio. We had been married for about a year. And at that time, all of our family was in San Antonio. I grew up, I was born in San Antonio, lived there my whole life. He had lived there most of his life. And he started talking about going to seminary. And, you know, of course, my thought is, well, that's fine as long as you find one in San Antonio, because I'm not leaving here. This is where I'm comfortable. This is all I know. All my family's there. And so I just started really resisting God. I definitely fell into that autonomous state of, well, I'm not going. I'm not leaving here. So, you know, we just have to figure it out kind of on our own. And it was just this, it was a battle. It was a battle. I was battling with God, resisting him and what he was opening up to us as his will. And so, I just kept fighting. Finally, one day I got to the point where I was really tired of fighting. And I just finally said to God, all right, I don't want to leave San Antonio, but ultimately I want to do what you want me to do. And so I just had to come to that point of surrender. If you want us to stay, obviously I want to stay, but if you want us to go, I want to go. But it was just me resisting God because I wanted to be comfortable. And what was comfortable for me was my home of 24 years. And I didn't want to step out of that comfort zone. And in this category, we fear loss. And for me, moving away from all of my family, and at the time, all of Cecil's family as well, that was a huge loss for me. And something that I had to confront and I had to deal with.
That's good. I hope you're hearing in each of these, the similarity is it's always coming back to that autonomy piece. Most of what drives our autonomy, that thing that says we want to do this on our own, there's some kind of desire in there. There's something, right, that makes us feel comfortable. For her, it was literally that ability to be in a comfortable space. right? Some of you, you're thinking, no way, man, like get my passport and stamp it globally. Like you know those people, they'll go anywhere and everywhere and they fit in. And that's not my wife, right? She does really well when she gets into certain cultures and you get to know people, you do really well. But saying I'm going to uproot my life that does not drive her, right? That's not her. She not only should not feel comfortable, it doesn't excite her. It's not what she wants to do, right? And I'm not saying that God's always going to take your one thing and just rip it from your lives. I mean, she's wired that way. But she did have to learn how do I walk with God? And am I willing to surrender my autonomy in those moments? And obviously, one of the things we've discovered is, we moved to Dallas from San Antonio. That's better than moving to Chicago, right? Or across the world. Or anybody as a child think, well, if I don't want to be a Christian because God's going to send me to Africa. Now some of you are going, send me to Africa. It'd be cool over there. There's great ministry going on. But it's that thing to shake that autonomy loose. And that was her thing. For me, I'm gonna tell you that I would relate probably most to the life for God category. That there's something about when I really, God started to grow me in college and challenge me, and the mission of God came into the front of my mind. I was walking across a parking lot one day, and some of you have heard this story because I tell it probably at least once a year now. I was walking with a buddy of mine who was a Jewish young man. We were both young college students at the time, and his dad was an Orthodox Jewish rabbi, and I was very sensitive to the fact that he was not a Christian, because all my other circles I ran in were Christian students and people and friends, and so I was always very cautious about that. And one day we were walking across after class a parking lot, and a Gideon's, somebody from the Gideons was out there handing out Bibles, and I could see the person coming at us, and I tried to get between my buddy and the person handing out the Bible, because I just knew, first of all, my friend had a really colorful language. It was quite entertaining at times, but I knew that the littlest thing could set him off, and so I was trying to avoid some of that, but at the same time, I also didn't want there to be a confrontation that would damage my relationship with my friend, because obviously I was trying to live my faith in front of him in ways, and so I tried to intervene there, and I'll never forget leaving. And that was not a great day, but anyway. We got past it. But what I discovered about me over the years is the mission of God rose to a level that almost where it became God for me. This sounds so good. Listen, all four of these categories have great things in them. Right? So don't hear me say that it's necessarily there's something inherently evil in all these categories. It really comes back to your heart before God. The mission of God is a great thing, right? We want to grow the kingdom. We want to help people discover life with God. That's a great thing. But the mission of God is not God. He didn't ask me to be a part of the mission and find my value in being part of the mission. You saw this out of me at Christmas. On Christmas Eve, when my wife says, and I was in severe pain if you weren't here. I was in severe back pain because of a bulging disc. I almost couldn't stand up. The next morning, Christmas Day, I could not stand up. I had to go to the ER. But when my wife says to me, you don't have to do this. Like there are people who can take over for you. And I said, no. It's because what drives me sometimes is the mission. Because sometimes I get my value from thinking that I've done the mission of God for God. The mission can become God for me. Almost like he needs me to complete something.
I'm going to rat him out.
There it
Actually,
is.
What he said
This is why you don't give your wife a microphone on stage.
Actually, what he said was, that would be the death of me.
That is a true statement. And it almost was. And it continues to be. And it's the thing that I tell you, this is where, if you find yourself in one of these categories this morning, it's okay. The question is, where do we go from here? I want to take you real quick to 1 Corinthians 13, because I want to leave you with a verse this morning. 1 Corinthians 13 is the love chapter. if you've ever heard it, you might not have recognized this, but I almost guarantee you heard it at somebody's wedding. I'm going to tell you, it's okay if they read it there. It's so much more than a wedding passage. In fact, it was never originally a wedding passage. 1 Corinthians 13, but it talks about love deeply. And verse 31 says this, so whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, get up in the morning, go work out, go to work. You think, yeah, but I don't work a job where we study the Bible all day. Exactly. God never said you had to do that. He put Adam and Eve in the garden and he goes, tend the garden. He made them farmers. He said, go plant. Go take care of the animals. Take care of the earth we live in. Whatever you do, everything that you do, do it what? All for the what? Glory of God. You got to say it better. Do it all for what? The glory of God. That's what this is about. You want to know what life with God is? It's a life for the glory of God. And when you get there, and by the way, next week, we're going to start talking about a little more of a practical way of pulling this into our lives on a daily basis. So don't come back, because this has been a lot of conversation about us, right? A lot of hard face-to-face in the mirror. You know, what's going on with me? Next week, we want to give you some very practical things, not rituals, not rules, just things that we can make this more personal. But the glory of God, when it replaces your autonomy, you will discover life with God. You will discover a peace. When things fall apart, I'm tired. But there's something there. And if you know me, you know I don't do this very often, but when there's something there, and I want you to discover that, life with God, I really could care less about the rest. Your life's not going to be perfect. My back may never stop hurting again. But there's still life with God. And when you get there, you will know something that the rest of the world is starving for. Churches are starving for. Life with God. When you leave in just a few minutes, we're going to give you a flyer. And we're going to give you, in the flyer, there's going to be a chart that takes the last 2 weeks and just, in the book that we drew a lot of this from is at the bottom. And we're going to give it to you. Take this home. You can look at it. You can throw it away. I don't know what your learning style is, but there's just great summary stuff on here. Just don't throw it away here. Take it home. Make me feel good. I printed it for you. In the flyer, though, there are going to be 3 questions. Not because it's a magic number. We were talking this week, and these were the questions that came out. And instead of leaving here today, and man, this week I've got to do these 6 things to make God happy, I want you to leave here today with some questions that you're willing to sit with God on. Here's the first one. In fact, let me just ask you to kind of, if you want to enter a time of prayer, close your eyes for just a second. I ask you to close your eyes oftentimes just so you'll stop thinking about the people around you. But these are the questions that I want you to, we're not ending with these questions, we're beginning our walk with God with these questions. Here's the first one. When were you not with God today? Maybe for you it's this way. You look at those 4 categories. When were you living life over, under, from, for? When were you trying to get God to do something for you by living a certain way instead of just walking with Him? Can you find that spot? You need to, because I guarantee you, every one of us, we didn't walk with God all day, every day. That's just not possible, it seems like. But we can get there over time. But most of us, that's not where we start. Here's another question. What percentage of your day were you not aware of God? What percentage of your week this week were you not aware of God? You're going to find that you can leave this conversation right now, walk out the door and have a flat tire or something. And all of a sudden, you've kind of left God because you're focused on something else. Here's the last question I want to give you this week. This one's tough. Does God love the you you've discovered? So many times we think that we only please God if we stay home, and when we're reading our Bibles, we think, oh, well, I did my devotional this morning and God was really pleased with me in that moment. Don't be surprised that God's pleased with you all day long. Also, don't be surprised when you begin to learn and understand that even when you mess up, when you sin, when you directly disobey Him, He doesn't leave you. For some of you, if you didn't have a good home life growing up, would that not be just the most incredible thing to ever have from a parent who never left you? A parent who stuck with you even when you had to tell them the stuff you didn't want to tell them? Start there and dream about it, because that's the kind of God you have.